Hey everybody, it is Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul, and back with another special edition, man. Today we are doing a happy birthday tribute to another one of my all-time favorite artists. A very happy birthday to this brother right here. That, of course, is Peter Cetera. From recent years there, playing his acoustic guitar in concert. Peter, of course, for many years, the outstanding bassist and vocalist for Chicago, and then he went on to a long solo career, and then just finally retired here just a few years ago, but turning 78 today. I can't believe it. My man doesn't look a day over 58. It is the great Peter Cetera. So just like we did with Barry Gibb a few weeks ago there, and you guys may remember if you've been around the channel for a while, you may remember I told you, man, when it comes to Barry Gibb, he's sitting at a pretty small table there in the VIP section of my all-time favorite singers. But I told you there's one other dude there at that table as well, and that is Peter Cetera. So just like we did with Barry Gibb, we're going to jump around a little bit. I'm going to play some of my favorite stuff from Peter's long solo career. We will also go back to some classic old Chicago and see if we can cook up some tracks that have some of that great bass playing on it that Peter used to do back there in the day. And of course, the voice is always present in Peter's work. What can you say about his singing over the years, right? Both with Chicago and as a solo artist. This is not Peter's first appearance on the channel. You may remember a while back there, I played a song from his solo album, World Falling Down, a great tune that I love, one of my favorites, called Have You Ever Been in Love? And of course, we have previously done a couple of Chicago songs on the channel, including Peter's very first vocal on record for Chicago back there in 1969 on the Chicago Transit Authority album. That was Questions 67 and 68. And then, if I'm not mistaken, a long time ago, maybe a few months ago, we did an album track from Chicago 6, a Robert Lamb song called Rediscovery, that included some pretty tasty, funky bass work from Peter Cetera as well. So it's not Peter's first time on the channel, but look around, here comes his birthday, and it's time to jump into some Peter Cetera, folks. So that's what we are going to be doing today. Let's kick it off with this little number here. How about we start? Peter's got so much stuff. Where should we start? How about if we start with this album? Now, a lot of people think that Peter Cetera's first solo work was the Karate Kid thing there, got The Glory of Love, right? But that is not the case. That was his first solo album released after he left Chicago. But what a lot of people don't remember is that Peter actually released his first solo album while he was still in Chicago back in 1981. And what an interesting time that was for Mr. Cetera and for Chicago, because for all intents and purposes, man, Chicago, that could have been the end of the line for them there in 1981. A lot of problems in the band. And Peter decided to step out there and do a solo album while Chicago was working on some other issues and some other challenges. And Peter has said in an interview there when he retired a couple years ago, I think he mentioned that originally he was hoping that if this solo album took off there in 1981, that he was looking to start a new band with his buddy Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys. And if Chicago's troubles continued, Peter would step into his new solo career and into his new band with Carl Wilson. Well, as we all know, that was not the case because, of course, the record company knew that that was part of the plan, and they sabotaged the album from the start. So this album never got off the ground. The next thing you know, Chicago was signed to a different label. They brought in David Foster as producer for Chicago 16 the following year, and the rest is history. Peter and David Foster took Chicago all the way back up to #1 the following year. But let's check out Peter's solo album there and see what he was thinking in the midst of all that difficulty with Chicago, not knowing what the future of the band might be in 1981. He steps out and does a self-produced album. He wrote this song, he sings this song, plays the hell out of the bass on this song. produced the album, as I said, and this number here, a little tune called Livin in the Limelight, also includes the stellar guitar work of a then very young Steve Lukather from Toto. So be sure to check that out in the middle. From 1981, a happy birthday wish to Mr. Peter Cetera. Let's get this birthday party started. Now, some of you may be saying, what the heck is Peter Cetera doing rocking out like this? Well, that tells me you don't remember some of those hard rockin' numbers Peter wrote for some of those old Chicago albums. Remember back there in the 70s, a song called Hideaway on that Chicago 8 album? And then there was a song called Little Miss Lovin' on that Hot Streets album in 1978, had the Bee Gees singing on that one. And, of course, on into his solo career. Peter knew how to rock, and he loved to rock. And here it is, 1981, and he's cutting loose with Steve Lukather coming up. Gonna be pleased to meet you, and I was pleased to meet my man Peter Cetera back there. I think this is back in the early 2000s when he was doing a little promo tour there. Went and saw Peter at a bookstore. He played a couple songs, I think, and he talked to the crowd a little bit, signed some autographs. And then going all the way back to the early days of my writing career there, I think I mentioned I wrote an article for a music magazine. This is back in 1986, in the summer of 86, when Peter was just launching his full-on solo career there with The Glory of Love from the Karate Kid soundtrack and his first solo album, Solitude Solitaire. Got to talk to Peter one day back then, and then as I mentioned in that previous video there, what a guy Peter Cetera turned out to be. They used to call him the Polish Prince back there in the Chicago days, and he turned out to be just a prince of a gentleman. All those years later there when I met him, kept in touch with me. We corresponded for a while. Here's another personal postcard from Peter. There's another one back there on the wall. An absolutely lovely human being, Mr. Peter Cetera. I'm happy as can be to celebrate this brother's birthday, man. Are you kidding me? Like I told you, man, that's what I wanted to be, a bass player. And here he is all these years later on the cover of Bass Player magazine, The Untold Story, Shocking Truths. Revealed in, the shocking truth for some of you may be that Peter Cetera is one hell of a badass bass player back there in the day with Chicago when he was doing that all the time. Of course, he's a great singer. We all know what a legendary tenor vocalist, as so many others have noted, including Robert Lamb within Chicago. Man, pretty short list of tenor rock vocalists in Peter Cetera's league, and none of them sound anything like him. Such a distinctive and cool voice for so many years there, both in Chicago and as a solo artist. The great Peter Cetera, man. Happy 78th, Mr. Cetera. A career exceedingly well done, my friend. Well, let's move on to some more. You heard Livin in the Limelight, right? That's 1981, Peter Cetera rocking out with Steve Lukather. And I cannot verify this. I've never heard Peter or Steve Lukather speak to this, but it kind of sounds to me from listening to that track and listening to that guitar solo that Peter Cetera and Steve Lukather were in the studio working on Peter's album, and I imagine that the conversation went something like this. Steve said, well, what do you want me to do on this song? How are you hearing this one? And Peter said, well, why don't you just go rip the shit out of it like Terry Kath would have back in the day? And Steve said, gotcha. And that's why you hear a few of those little tricks in there. Kind of sounds like maybe the ghost of Terry Kath was hanging around that session, and Steve Lukather sets that thing on fire. And of course, all these years later now, Steve Lukather's a household name in the guitar community. But folks, this is 40 years ago. Toto was barely off the ground back then in 1981. Steve was already a studio legend, of course. But Peter Cetera wisely tapping Steve Lukather to come in there and lay down a guitar track. Suited that song perfectly, didn't it? Livin' in the Limelight. Now, here's the other thing. They released this album there in 1981, Warner Brothers, Full Moon Warner Brothers. And as I said, Chicago was in Chicago was in, they were hurting, folks. Okay, let's just be blunt. Chicago was hurting big time in 1981 for a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into, much beyond the fact that they'd already been cut loose from their previous record label and they were searching for a new home, and they didn't really know what was going to happen in that band. And that's when Peter stepped out and did that album. Well, as I said, the record company sabotaged the album because they really wanted to keep Chicago going. They did not want the star vocalist of the band cutting loose and going out on his own. That's the last thing that they needed. They needed to keep that cash cow going for Chicago. So they sabotaged the record, and yet, despite that, this song, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I recall seeing this song, Livin' in the Limelight, believe it or not, folks, all the way up in the #1 spot on Billboard's Hot Rock charts back there in 1981. True story. Peter Cetera. Gets a lot of crap for being the ballad guy and the duet guy and all that stuff. Dude had a #1 AOR rock track in 1981 with Livin in the Limelight. Seems like a good place to start our party. All right, I'll see you back here for the next one. Jump back into some old Chicago, then we'll hit Peter's solo career again. Who knows where we will go? Maybe a couple surprises. See you in the next one. Living in the Limelight. Who said Peter Cetera can't sing rock? That brother could throw down some rock. Come on now. Don't you remember 25 or 6 to 4 and I'm a Man and some of that stuff back in the day? Give me a break. That brother could sing all kinds of different stuff. As you'll see in the next one. See you then. In the line.